Good morning, Mitchell. Happy Monday.
Good morning.
How
It's
you
always
feeling
good
on
coming off
this?
a win, isn't it?
Not only is it good coming off a win, but it was a dominant win from the Hoosiers against UCLA. And I don't want to say that neither of us were expecting that, because we did talk about the possibility of Indiana really taking control if they continued to execute at the level in which they did in the first two games. And that's exactly what they did. I just think this time there's a level of shock because we are not used to seeing any form of Indiana football looking this dominant on the road against a Power 5, Power 4 type of opponent.
Yeah, and you can say whatever you want about UCLA. You still got to fly across the country. They have good athletes and just steamrolled from the very beginning. And UCLA made some errors where they shot themselves in the foot in the first couple possessions, but after that, Indiana was just tougher up front, faster in the back end, and the quarterback was phenomenal. So I don't know. I don't know what else to say. Like they played a phenomenal game, and obviously there's a point in the game where it would be totally justified for them to kind of freak out with the way that it's being officiated and the things that seem to just kind of pile on top of each other that were kind of bananas.
And I think
And
a
they didn't.
lot of Indiana fans, too, recognized that moment midway through the third quarter because, again, every other Indiana football team in the past, that's when they fold and let the other team back into the game if they have leads like that.
Yeah, my Twitter was covered with Micah McFadden. Micah McFadden all over again against Cincinnati, and how Indiana was on their way to beat Cincinnati by 50. That happens, and then they end up losing by a couple touchdowns. Felt like Indiana just pressed even harder down on their neck when all that was happening. Like, all right, this is nonsense. Let's just get out of here and finish the job. I expected, I think we talked about it a little last week, I expected them to win and make it look pretty easy. And by easy, I mean 10 points, 14
Remember,
would
I think
be.
you said 14.5 was maybe the spread that you would have put it at, or like that's the most you would have bet on this
Right. I would
team.
have taken Indiana all the way up to 2 touchdowns, and it felt like it could have been 5 touchdowns. Like they just rolled, clinical, efficient. I thought they kept their head really well. Now everyone's going to talk about the penalties. There was maybe a couple false starts. Okay, that happens. Couple offsides, preventable, but yeah, it was just a clinical game, and I don't know how you can look at the rest of the schedule and not get ridiculously unrealistic.
Yeah. And I'll go ahead and throw this out there, Mitchell. I was going to share this with you before we started recording, but I wanted to make sure I got your reaction from it just in case you hadn't seen it, but maybe you have already. Bill Connolly of ESPN has Indiana in his projected college football playoff seated at number 11.
Yeah, I'm going to start by saying this. I don't think there is any bit of Indiana football content that you could bring up that I hadn't seen already.
Okay.
I have been consuming at just an
I should know better.
unbelievable rate. Yeah. So I did see that. Not sure I'm ready to make that yet.
Yeah.
But the rest of the schedule, Nebraska is the next one I think you really circle. I mean, obviously you have to look at all the Big Ten games just because of Indiana's history, but
the Nebraska game will be here's what's going to happen. Obviously, you're going to play Charlotte, and that's a game you should take care of business with. I don't think you see Indiana jump into the top 25 after that win, unless you just have a whole lot of shaking up going on in the top 25 this upcoming week. When you face Maryland the following week, if you win that game, especially if you win it in a similar fashion that you've done so far this season, that's the point I think you see Indiana jump into the top 25. And then if you take care of business with Northwestern, that sets up the phenomenal theoretical situation that we've talked about since day one of Indiana and Nebraska facing off on homecoming with two potentially unbeaten teams facing off with one another. And at that point, I think if Indiana gets to that game and pulls off that win, I think at that point, you can realistically, and maybe I hate using the word realistic and this with Indiana football at the same time, because it does seem like it should always be out of the realm of possibility because it is Indiana. But I do believe if you get past Nebraska and at that point you are still unbeaten, it is okay at that point to start talking possibility of the college football playoff. But we are a long ways away from that.
Yeah, we're a long ways away. But if you're sitting at 6-0, Nebraska will probably be undefeated as well. That's a top 20 matchup. So whether you think Nebraska is the best team and the worst team in the country, or the worst team, whatever you think about them, it'll be a top 20 matchup at the time. You beat them. I think, honestly, you're one game away from the college football playoff. I really do. You beat Michigan. Who cares what happens at Ohio State? Ohio State
Because if
is
you're 11-1, I mean, you're more than likely going to get a second shot at them in the Big Ten championship at that
100%.
point.
Right. And I think in terms of tiers, Ohio State exists kind of in a different tier with maybe Texas and Georgia than the rest of the country. Now, Georgia faltered a little, but I'm sure that they'll start stepping on necks. So I don't think losing to Ohio State, even by a couple touchdowns, I don't think the committee or like anybody that watches that and looks at that is going to be like, oh, well, they can't beat Ohio State. I don't think that's going to have quite as big an impact as if they lose to somebody like, I don't know, anyone else on their schedule when you're trying to make something like that happen. I just think that's way ahead of ourselves.
Yeah. And it may be absolutely ridiculous. There may be fan bases that aren't of, the Indiana Hoosiers that click on this video and hear us talking college football playoff and think we're being complete lunatics. And maybe we are lunatics, but you can't eliminate the possibility right now whenever there is a path in front of you. And it is fun to at least mention it, even if it doesn't end up becoming reality.
Well, all you can base what we're saying, what our perception of the team on, is what they've done in the first 3 games. They can't control who they've played. They can't control anything else. All they can control is themselves and how they handle their business. 3 teams have lined up against them, and they've smoked every single one of them. That's what good teams do. Ole Miss hasn't played anybody, really. They
true.
went to a bad Wake Forest team and won 40-6, and people are talking about them like, oh, well, all they can do is play the team in front of them. So you have to, just because we're not number 1 in the country right now, you kind of have to say the same thing. We've handled our business like a really, really good football team. And that's why you start to get a little excited when you look down the road. But Charlotte's a trap for sure. And I'm sure that Cignetti will have them geared up because he just seems to – I can never tell. I always get nervous with his post-game and like halftime interviews. He just looks like he's going to say some off-the-wall stuff. And I have to walk out of the room.
He was kind of set up for another laughing at the camera moment at halftime again whenever the female reporter for NBC asked him what the message was going to be at halftime. And of course, you immediately think of whenever he laughed at that Shane guy for Big Ten Network. Then he looks at the camera and walks away. Looks like an evil supervillain.
Yes.
He was a little more respectful to the NBC reporter on Saturday.
Yeah. I'm sure he was just as frustrated.
Yeah.
And then it's just so funny. And I think a lot of coaches are like this, but you just went to UCLA, you beat them by 30. And they ask him, what are you thinking about? What's on your mind as you get ready for next week? And all he can think about is giving up a touchdown at the end of the second quarter. That's just the kind of focus that you need. I had it was weird interacting with the UCLA fan base for the first time.
Okay.
On Twitter. Just a lot of people talking about how overhyped up we were as Indiana fans and talking a big game and all this stuff. Like,
because they wanted it to seem more like they just suck and Indiana just beating up on a bad team, which that could be the case.
Yeah, I think that quarterback stinks out loud. I also think their offensive line is not good. And Indiana took advantage of it. That's what good teams do. So now I don't know really anything about Charlotte. I'll be honest. What's even
I
their?
know they've got Biff Poggi is their head coach, and this dude is, I don't know if he still does this, but in the past, look up, Google image this guy real quick. He's known for wearing wife beaters on the sideline, I believe.
I love. What's this dude's name?
His name is Biff Poggi, Biffpoggi. And if you do a quick Google search, this dude looks like a WWE wrestler. This is not your typical college football head coach, Mr. Biff Poggi of the Charlotte 49ers. I'll go ahead and do a quick, I'll throw it up for the YouTube viewers to take a look in case they don't want to look it up themselves. So right here, this is Mr. Biff Poggi with his, I guess, infamous wife beater look for Charlotte football. Any thoughts on this man?
You can just tell he loves football. I'm not sure if there was a different if there was no football, this is one of my favorite games to play. If football didn't exist, like what is this guy doing?
He's a WWE wrestler, 100%.
And I think it's pretty easy to him and the Big Show are fighting it out. I probably should.
Let me pull up this dude's. Let me just quit sharing my screen here real quick, and I'm gonna check out this guy's record here. I believe he's entering his second season with the Charlotte 49ers, and I'm just looking forward to seeing this guy roam the sidelines at Memorial Stadium. Hopefully, he gets mad and has nothing to be happy about. But through obviously his beginning of the year or beginning of his tenure was in 2023, and he was 3-9 last year. He's currently 1-2 this year. His one win coming against an FCS opponent, I believe. And they've already played one other power opponent in North Carolina, and they lost that game 38-20. So I would say this is probably on that exact same level as an FIU, maybe a little bit better potentially. I don't know how good, they are compared to the Panthers, but we did see that FIU dismantled Central Michigan. And did they end up beating FAU? I believe FAU was their opponent this week, if I'm not mistaken.
I think they beat them pretty good, and maybe I dreamed this. No, they got smoked. 38-20.
Yeah, so FIU and Charlotte more than likely on the same level, at least in terms of what they're probably expected to do to Power 5 opponents, which is not very much. And so, again, you mentioned this being a trap game for Indiana, and this will be the first piece of evidence that we see if Curt Cignetti is able to keep them from getting too high after a big win like UCLA on the road. And if they come out and handle business the way that they want to and probably are expected to, then that's another foot in the right direction. Obviously, clean up the penalties as well. You want to eliminate the second quarter letting up, if you will. Stop allowing the last drive of the half be a field goal or a touchdown for the opposing team. Those would be good signs to know that your team and program are continuing to move forward, even though you're playing a lesser opponent in Charlotte this week.
Yeah, I think that all Indiana's done in the first 3 weeks is just get better and better. And I do want to point out, if you're watching on YouTube, we did have to pause. This is Dad home alone on a Monday morning. My wife had to go do something, so I have the baby with me. This is her primetime media debut.
It is. Shout out to right Maggie Paige.
This is it. MP, she's fired up. She was less fired up, was screaming bloody murder in the back room because she woke up. But now she's back. So hello, Maggie.
She's content now. She realized all the fun was in here because we were talking about how great this Indiana Hoosiers football team is.
Yeah, and she told me that Indiana fans should not worry. Cignetti's going to have them locked in. This kind of trap game happens to bad teams, which Indiana is not. But to kind of finish what I was saying, I think in the first week, we talked a lot about how you make big strides from first to second game. You clean up a lot of things. And it feels like, and yeah, they played Western Illinois, beat them by 70, whatever but it was not a good team, that Western Illinois team. So you look at some of the improvements they were really trying to make from the first week to the second week. I think a lot of stuff we are going to have to wait until UCLA to really find out if they made a lot of those changes, made a lot of those improvements. And I think across the board, yeah, it was. They're just so sound, and it doesn't feel like when things go bad or they make a bad play or they get in offsides, and maybe this is mostly the quarterback, but they just feel calm and take their time. It's weird. It's sometimes you watch a team and everything just feels frantic and chaotic. It never feels like that on offense or defense. They just slow, composed, and they do their job. And I think they made a ton of improvement from FIU to UCLA. And it's all like double the improvement you kind of expect. So they're on a really cool trajectory. You've got, again, a favorable schedule coming up. I think this Charlotte game is perfect. Even if you get punched in the mouth a little bit, I think you're superior enough in talent that you can still win this game handily and really
Spread's
start.
at 28, by the way. What would you take that spread if you were betting on this game? Because for me, this is probably the over compensating part of me. I thought the spread was going to be closer to 40. But again, maybe I didn't realize that Charlotte was a little better than I thought.
I would have put the spread at like 24, 25. So
okay.
28 is interesting. I'm going to think about it. That'll be a Saturday morning decision, whether we hit the button or not. But it's not going to be
the minus 2.5 this past weekend was free money. That was the freest money I've ever gotten.
I told you I smashed that. I smashed that on Sunday. Yeah. Like that was an obvious one to me. This one I don't love that spread. I just think that, and this is maybe just old school Indiana talking, but you get a little bit of positivity, positive momentum, people maybe talking about you, getting some votes in the top 25, start thinking you're good. And Cignetti was already all over that, wasn't he, in this post game? Like, now we got to learn how to deal with some success. People are going to be talking about it. He seems to be
he's fully aware of the process of how all of this works.
Yeah, and because he's done it a million times. You saw his history flashed up again yesterday. It just is so impressive. He turns things around so quickly. A lot of times you have to wait 2-3 years before you say, okay, now he's got the roster he wants. And transfer portal makes it a little easier, but this is still a team that somehow won 2 or 3 games, however many it was last year, felt like 0, and the week before, or the year before, felt like 0. So this was a team that was in the dumps, and you just completely changed the culture in that place to now look at us talk. Like, can you imagine us talking like this in week 4 of last year?
Yeah, it was it's very different environment.
And I expect them to come out and be poised. And I know you dropped your passy. I'm sorry. Be poised and handle their business just like they have in the first 3 weeks.
Here, I'll let you get the passy real quick, and I'll mute your microphone on my end. But one thing I want to ask you here in just a second, I'm going to ask you, not immediately, I'm going to ask you about fan attendance for this weekend and what you potentially expect it to look like, and especially when it comes to staying at halftime, you think that will change. But before that, I want to ask you about Curtis Rourke specifically, because he had one of the best performances when it comes to third down efficiency that I think maybe an Indiana quarterback could have ever had. 9 for 9, and I believe over 120-something yards when throwing on third down alone. Do you think he has the potential to be, and maybe he already is, the best game manager since Nate Sudfeld, or maybe older than that, or further along than that, if that makes sense?
Yeah, and I didn't watch IU like die hard, so I don't know some of the older guys, but Nate was the guy that pops into my head, just with the calmness and the ability to make every throw. I don't know that he's got the biggest arm. He's not throwing.
He may not need it, though.
Right.
The way that they use their intermediate routes and the way that the receivers are able to get away from the defenders, you don't need the big play every single time when you can make those other smaller type plays work.
I was just about to say that. He may not have the biggest arm, but in this offense, he doesn't need it. They're utilizing his talent and what he's good at about as well as you can. So I give a lot of credit to the coaching staff. Mostly, they're putting their guys in position to win.
Let's before I let you go, and I know you got to take care of babies, so I don't want to keep you for too much longer, but I do want to ask, because I know it was a big topic of conversation 2 weeks ago after the FIU game. Fan attendance, not necessarily about filling a stadium up, but leaving at halftime. Do you think we'll see a change in that this week?
No, unfortunately. I don't, because I don't think that this will be a game. I don't know 28, but it feels like Indiana will jump on them early and kind of just maintain a couple touchdown lead. And I don't think we're quite at the point where Indiana fans want to just sit back and enjoy that somehow. I don't know how that is possible, but that's just what history shows. I think you'll get a good crowd to start the game. And I'm guessing when I say not everyone's going to leave, it's not going to be like half full by halftime, but I think you'll still see a significant portion of people leave just because it's still early. And you can justify in your mind, if you haven't watched and you just see 3-0 against the three teams they've played, that, okay, well, those are three really bad teams based on history. They're not that good anyways, and this is just Charlotte. I think you'll see the big change against Maryland.
There you go. We'll wait and see. And Mitchell, I'll let you go. I know you've got dad duty, the all important dad duty to take care of until the wife gets home. Appreciate your time as always. Appreciate Maggie getting to make her debut appearance on In Touch with Indiana Sports, or maybe on camera in general. But it's a pleasure to have her be a part of the show today.
Yeah, and who knows? She may be back. Maybe she'll have some ideas. She is the only undefeated Paige in the whole family. She is 3-0. She's never seen an Indiana loss, and she doesn't plan on starting now.
Looking forward to seeing how much longer that streak goes on. Maybe Maggie Paige was the one thing that this Indiana football program was truly missing. The chosen one. Mitchell, appreciate you as always. We'll do this again next week.
Absolutely. Can't wait.